Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. Governance can be a dirty word for our procurement stakeholders. When they think governance, they think of endless stage gate approvals, approval boards and councils, and essentially a slowdown in the buying process. The one thing really, more than anything else, that we have a bad reputation for. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be like that. So today I wanted to share a simple sourcing governance process that I first built as an indirect sourcing manager that I put into place actually probably about 15 years ago now, but that I've actually used ever since. Now, before I start, I do want to share a little bit of context. First of all, you might be wondering, why is this another what we call a solo show without an interviewee? Well, through the last 5 years at Art of Procurement, I have periodically recorded shows like this, all the way back in 2016 when we published episodes twice a week, which is kind of crazy now I think about it. I published a show like this every Friday. We're moving back towards a greater mix of longer form interviews and short form solo shows. So that way I'm able to share more of what I see across the broad range of procurement teams that I speak to and work with here at Art of Procurement, as well as dipping into my key learnings over the past 20 years or so as a procurement professional. And secondly, this is another example, like last week, of one of the on-demand mini courses that's actually available in AOP Mastermind, along with the templates and instructions on how to turn the inspiration here into outcomes. We built Mastermind as a way for procurement professionals at all levels to collaborate with each other, to network, to benchmark, and ultimately grow in what is a face-to-face but virtual environment. There's just over a week to go before our next application window closes on July the 1st here in 2020. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Mastermind, just go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. Okay, so sourcing governance. When it comes to running a sourcing process, your experience probably matches one of the following two scenarios. So either you have a strict 7 or 8 step process, and at the end of each step, you have to get an approval of some sort to move to the next step. Or you have an approval council at the end where you have to prove that you checked every single box along the way. It's burdensome, it creates mountains of paperwork, and it really slows down the process. It makes the stakeholders want to bypass procurement altogether, and unfortunately, oftentimes they do. On the other hand, you have a sourcing process with no governance at all. There's no consistency of approach, and by the time a supplier has been sourced, you find yourself debating with your stakeholder or with finance on how to capture the value that you created, such as negotiating the savings that you are wanting to claim. Or even worse, the stakeholder gets all the insights that you shared with them at the beginning of the process, and they thank you for your time in doing so and for your insights and your knowledge. And then unbeknown to you, they go and select their preferred supplier on their own. They come back to you and say either, well, we selected this supplier, but the price is a little bit higher than what our budget is. So please can you help us just knock down the price? Or they'll come back and say, well, here's the deal. Here's the contract we need signing. Please can you coordinate to get it signed and get them a PO as soon as you can? And honestly, it was that latter example that actually led me to create a simple 2-step governance process. We had a broadly defined sourcing process, but stakeholders who'd often go and do their own thing after our team had provided some market insights or suggested a sourcing strategy. And at the end, we'd be arguing over the savings or who could claim them. So this 2-step process balanced that fine line between responsible governance and creating a burden. And it also fundamentally changed how we aligned ourselves with our stakeholders. So what is it? Well, each of the 2 steps are an approval document that's signed by the sourcing lead, the key stakeholder, and the finance analyst for procurement or for that stakeholder group, assuming that you have one. Now, if you don't have anyone in finance, and I do often come up against this, well, I'd first suggest that it might actually be a really good opportunity to open up that chain of communication, bring finance into the conversation. Now, you can do this just between procurement and your stakeholder if finance really has no interest in getting involved. But, that to me is a little bit of a red flag, because we want to be bringing in finance into these conversations so they can kind of audit, if you will, the work that we're doing. Now, the first document is called a project strategy approval form. In it, you provide an overview of the project, what's being bought, what is the baseline or the forecasted spend or the budget, why is it needed if it's a first-time purchase, and when does the sourcing need to be completed by. In the next section, include current supply market conditions related to the product or service being bought. Is it a monopoly, or is it an area with lots of commoditized suppliers? Are there any risk factors to be aware of, or any changing cost drivers? The third section is an overview of the project strategy and tactics that you'll use. This may include a list of suppliers that you invite to participate in the process. You can also include some roles and responsibilities here between you and your stakeholders, just to make sure everything is clear. And I think importantly, it's clear to your stakeholder, what their role is, what their role isn't throughout that process. And then finally, you want to document what success looks like. So for example, what's the savings methodology that you're going to use? How will savings be calculated? Or if savings isn't the primary driver, maybe it's not important at all for your company or for this particular product or service that's being bought. Are there any other primary value measures, and how will that value be quantified? That's important, as we'll come back and see later, because it really sets the foundation for doing the calculation when the project is finished. Now, with those elements in place, you now have procurement, the stakeholder, and finance, hopefully, aligned on the project strategy, the roles and responsibilities, and really importantly, how success is going to be measured. And I've always found that this alignment with the stakeholder also leads to much greater accountability from all sides. You're making a commitment to this project, both on the procurement side and on the stakeholder side. And you can use everything that is noted down and agreed and approved as your framework within which you execute the project. Now, the second part of this governance process, the last part, comes all the way at the end of the project, but before the final sourcing decision is made. And that is in the form of the project outcome approval form. And this document, again, has 4 different elements. First, the project overview. This can be the same as what's in that project strategy approval form. It's just an overview of the situation that can be updated as anything has changed as you've gone through the sourcing process. Secondly, you want to include the project outcome, so which supplier was selected, what the pricing was, and the justification for selecting that supplier. Third, detail out the project implementation steps. So what's left to do to take this from a recommendation to an implemented deal, and whose responsibility are the key components of that? Because sometimes, you have a stakeholder looking and thinking it's procurement responsibility, procurement looking at it as the stakeholder responsibility. Those kind of things tend to end messy. And then finally, you apply the savings or the value methodology, whichever you agreed on in the project strategy approval, to get your savings number, or to get the number of however else value is going to be defined. What's great about this is that should actually be a fairly simple conversation. So without this in place, I've found so many times you end up getting into a discussion, a debate, an argument, a conflict, whatever it may be, to try and get approval for the savings number. Or you get a lot of pushback, you have to do a lot of justification. Well, if you've already got everybody on board at the very beginning of the project that this is the methodology and the method of calculation, by the time you get to the end, all it is you're popping in the numbers, the final numbers from the project, into that methodology that you've already agreed on. It makes things so much easier, so much faster. And that's it. So to recap, you have 2 documents. One at the very beginning of the sourcing project, where you ensure that procurement, your stakeholder, and hopefully finance is aligned on the need, the strategy and the value measurement methodology. And then one at the end of the project, where you're tying everything up into a sourcing recommendation and the next steps that also determines the value of the final outcome. So that's all for today's podcast. It's a short one today. This has actually been adapted from one of our micro-learning courses that are available to all members of our AOP Mastermind community. It includes the templates that you need to be able to put this into practice. As I've shared before, Mastermind includes a number of different structured and action-oriented activities. We have an executive mastermind program, a CPO think tank, procurement excellence roundtables, we have some expert-led Q&As, and a number of structured learning workshops to go alongside this library of micro-learning courses, tools, and templates. To learn more about AOP Mastermind, you can head over to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And our first application deadline, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is July the 1st, 2020 for procurement teams. So that's it. I hope you are safe this week, and I'll be back again with another podcast next Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time.